Hello, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have around 120 people registered, so we're gonna wait a couple more minutes for people to join. It's really nice to see new and familiar faces, so thank you so much for your time to be with us tonight. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen in the meantime. While we wait for more people to join, I just want to remind you all real quickly about like Zoom and the different tools that you have. So I'd like to thank you all for being muted during the presentation. You'll have a moment where you'll be able to speak. This will happen. You'll have the option to use the raising option, which is normally at the bottom of your screen, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak or either ask your questions or submit any comment that you would like. You also have options to close caption, so you can activate that if you want, or I guess I can activate it for everybody, and you can disable it if you prefer. And yeah, so I just want to remind everybody again that this meeting is being recorded, and we have an interpreter joining us tonight. His name is Jim, and you can see him at the bottom of the screen. But if it's for some reason he disappears, you can find him and pin him. So if you need an as an interpreter, Jim will be here for you. So, all right, I see that there's more people joining. So yeah, it's great to see more people join us in the meantime. Maybe let's wait 1 or 2 more minutes for people to join in and we can start. In the meantime, feel free to use the chat option and you can either tell us your name, tell us where you're visiting us, where you're watching this meeting from. Just, let your neighbors know that you're here. So yeah, we'll start this meeting real soon. Thank you. All right, I see more people joining us tonight. If you just happen to join us, I just want to remind you real quick that this meeting is being recorded and that we appreciate you being muted for the time being. At some point during, or maybe at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to speak. You'll be able to use the raise hand option and either ask a question or submit a comment. So just know that we appreciate you being muted for now, but just letting you know that you'll be able to speak at some point. Um, if you need any assistance with interpretation, like American Sign Language, we have Jim, who you'll be able to see at the bottom of your screen for now. Just if you need, interpretation, make sure that you pin his screen to the top. But yeah, I think it's we have around 70 people. It's 6:05, so I believe that we can go ahead and start. So I'm gonna pass it to Director Riggs.
I think she's on the phone. Let's see.
We can maybe
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say maybe we can kick it off with introductions real quick and maybe just start with the intro to the program for the folks who have joined us. So while we wait for Karina, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kim Lucas. I am with the City of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, and I serve as the city's Assistant Director for Planning, Policy, and Permitting. And with me tonight, I have Cassandra Leopold, who's also with the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And Cassandra serves as our bicycle and pedestrian principal planner with the city. Next, we'll have the folks from Bike Pittsburgh who have joined us introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at Bike Pittsburgh.
I'm Anna. I'm the Multimedia Coordinator.
Thanks, folks. And I think if Karina, if you're ready, or okay, great.
Yep, sorry about that. All kinds of chaos happening in my world as usual. So great to have everyone here. I think that this is the third or fourth meeting on the Shadyside Connector for this time around. So we still have really great participation of, I think, over 100 people are pre-registered for this meeting. We hope that there'll be lots more that will log on as we do this. So just really glad for your sort of honest participation in here, the kind of respectful dialogue. We know that there are many, many different stakeholders for whom this corridor is extremely important. And so really appreciate all of the very thoughtful information and feedback and problem solving that you all have contributed to this point. I want to invite Councilperson Strasburger maybe to just say a few words of welcome, and then we will jump into it. And hopefully, you know, we'll go through, it's a somewhat long presentation, but we'll hopefully go through it rather swiftly and leave enough time for some continued dialogue. Councilperson, if you want to say any words.
Thanks, Director Ricks. Erica Strasburger, for those I haven't met, I'm the City Council representative for District 8, which includes Shadyside. And I'm really grateful to all of you for being here tonight, for taking time out of what I know is probably a busy schedule to engage in this. For some of you, this is your fourth or fifth meeting or sixth meeting on this project over the years. And I know that that any change to a neighborhood comes with a lot of challenging conversations at times and trade-offs. And I think we all who are part of the team that's talking about this and working on this acknowledge that. So as Director Rick said, I wanted to just thank you for your proactive and kind of solutions-oriented conversation. We've had some really good conversations about this. I want to continue that tonight. And I also just want to say that I know that no process or no engagement process is perfect, but hopefully you've been able to find various ways to touch and feel and understand this project, whether it's through the website, joining some of these meetings, joining some of the more casual meetings, and we will be continuing to engage with all of you. In some cases in person. We're looking forward to that as well, in a safe way outside. So please just stay tuned, keep talking to all of us, whether it's my office, whether it's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, whether it's the Move Forward team, and sharing your thoughts and ideas, because hopefully, as evidenced by this presentation, we are listening and we are hearing you. So let's just keep on working together and iterating and co-creating this together. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilperson. And I hope you all, those of you who have been, with us through this entire process, I expect and think that you will see the ways that your input have been taken in, the changes that have been made to reflect that, and the additional thinking and evolution that has gone on. So Ricardo, why don't you flip a slide? We already did the introduction, so you can flip another slide to the agenda. So we've done our welcome. We'll talk a little bit about the survey results from the last meeting and the input that we've gotten. We'll talk about those design refinements for alternatives and then what happens next. Go ahead, please. So apologies to those of you who have been here through every meeting. There's going to be some repeat information just so that we can level set for folks that are new to this process or for whom this is their first meeting. Why are we doing all of this? What is this all about? What we're trying to do really is about safety, and it's about we value every human life in Pittsburgh. We know that people either choose to travel by different modes or must travel by different modes because of income or ability constraints. And so we need to design, at least some of our 1,000 miles of streets that we have in the city as streets that can be comfortable for people traveling by those means. Go ahead, Ricardo. This is in line with the Complete Streets policy that City Council adopted now almost 5 years ago that we're still working hard to implement, which is really just saying that, while every street might not be really comfortable and inviting, we might not have the ability with our narrow little goat paths in Pittsburgh to provide each and every street with a safe space for each and every mode to travel, and we can do it on a network level. And so that's, I think, really a lot of foresight by City Council to really take a network perspective to this, and that's what we're talking about here. Go ahead. What is Move Forward PGH? You've seen, if you're here, you've seen some of the information and materials leading up to this. This is a partnership. It is an initiative of the city. So the city is leading this. The city, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is a small but spry organization. But in order to really touch and reach out and engage the number of people that we're working on, to really get involved in this. And again, your numbers at this are testament to that. We are working in partnership with 2 local nonprofits who also are working toward Complete Streets. So Healthy Ride, who is our beloved bike share service provider in the city, and Ricardo, who you correspond with a lot, is part of Healthy Ride. And so he's really helping to engage with us on this. And then Bike Pittsburgh, who has an extensive outreach network, has also been there to kind of provide a lot of the marketing and pushing out information and getting that out. So we're grateful for the partnership of these 2 organizations. The initiative itself is more than just bikes. As I mentioned, it is really about complete streets. It's really about creating a livable city, a safe city, a thriving city for all of us, and that we can do that from a streets and right-of-way perspective, not only through engineering our streets and providing spaces for that kind of travel, but also these organizations are vital to us in pushing out education so that we can really peacefully coexist in the diverse kinds of modes of travel that we have, that we can get, respect and compliance from all of the different travelers, and also by encouragement and really kind of moving people toward those more space efficient, lower emission modes of travel. We do at DOMI, we're driven by a number of values. Racial equity and opportunity for our lower income residents is one. And so providing for those affordable means of travel, human life and preservation of human life is the leading one for us. But also, we are driven by climate. And so really working on addressing lower emission modes of travel and moving us toward a more sustainable future. Go ahead, Ricardo, to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about the process, where we're at, the information that we've gotten so far. So go to the next slide. Go one more. I think will show us what we want to see, which is, if you click forward one more time, Ricardo. Thank you. So we've talked sort of each time that we've met about sort of what is this process? So, is this a done deal? Has this been, decided? The answer is no. That's what this whole planning phase is about, is that we're able to identify sort of our goals and objectives. What are we trying to accomplish here? What is the problem that needs to be solved? The problem being that we do lack a safe connection between Oakland and Shadyside. in East Liberty for people traveling by bicycle, especially for the more vulnerable, less confident users of that mode. So we, the first step where we began was defining the problem, working with you and a large stakeholder group here to help define the objectives and the balance that needed to be struck here. We spent our last meeting really going over the development of multiple different alternatives. I think we had 7 alternatives that we talked about at that meeting, and really weighing kind of the pros and cons. Some of them were audacious and wild and but thought-provoking to think about. Others much more practical and reasonable. But going through that exercise helped us see the strengths and weaknesses of each of them, lead to better refinement. Now we're at the point of trying to really get us narrowed down to what is that preferred alternative. So we can't do nothing. We have seen serious crashes and injuries on this corridor in this portion of the city. So we have to do something that can make that better. So this exercise is really trying to figure out what is the preferred alternative where we can provide for a safer place, but also balance with all of the other demands in this area. One more slide, Ricardo. So this is the series of public meetings that public and advisory meetings that have been had. So we've been with you quite a bit. We've also had, I think, 6 advisory committee meetings, 5 or 6 advisory committee meetings where we have, again, a really diverse body that kind of represent all of the different interests that are prevalent on the corridor, so that we can have some candid conversations and get some candid input. If you can go, Ricardo, to the next slide. We did, following the last meeting, we put out a survey to which we got really great participation, 205 responses to understand what are the priorities for the corridor, what are the alternatives of those 7 that we put forward, which ones kind of really seem to work for you and to address that best those highest order issues that you have. So of the things that we heard, speeding was something that cut across almost all participants. 70% of participants said that speeding vehicles and some portion of Ellsworth or in the local neighborhood, but predominantly in Ellsworth, were a concern for people. Nearly as many were concerned about maybe a little bit of careless driving that was happening, that they didn't feel safe crossing crosswalks, that they didn't feel confident that those vehicles would come to a full stop at intersections. Not surprisingly, given the topic of this effort, more than half noted that there is a lack of dedicated bicycle infrastructure here. That's obviously one of the issue statements that we're trying to address here. And then half as well were concerned about the quality and safety of the crosswalks in this area and wanting to make that safer for pedestrians that are in the area. When we talked about the different alternatives that were there to consider, there was a diversity. It's kind of spread across all 7 options. The top one that kind of folks seemed to start to coalesce around, and we saw some gravitational pull toward, was the notion of a traffic calmed Ellsworth, so an Ellsworth neighborway, where we could keep that corridor essentially as it is today, but reduce through different traffic measures, that we could reduce the volume, in particular of cut-through vehicles that are just using it to bypass some of the other major corridors in the area. But if we can move some of those away, that was the option that seemed to get draw higher amounts of energy to it. And then coming second to that was a little bit of a split decision on the using the local residential streets that run roughly parallel to Ellsworth as an option. We saw, a fair amount of support for protected bike lanes on Ellsworth, but others really weren't. The trade-off of eliminating parking was just not something that they could just could not endure that trade-off. We did see some support for making Ellsworth a one-way, but again, there were others who spoke very strongly against that, or the impacts that that would have. The notion of putting advisory bike lanes was really not welcomed by many as being fairly complex and confusing. So that one ranked quite lowly in it. When we asked people, which was interesting, just so you know, sort of who is your audience of those that are responding to the survey, we asked them, how would you categorize yourself, you know, as a bicyclist? And 38% consider themselves to be the strong and fearless. These are our bike advocates. They're the ones who are riding on this corridor now, really wanting to see these improvements. 38% consider themselves enthused and confident. So those are the sort of the top two kind of confidence levels. That is out of proportion with the population in general. So we had, what is that, almost 70% of the respondents to the survey were enthusiastic and confident bicyclists. In general, the population as a whole, that tends to be more around 12 or 15% that fall into that. So a bit of an overrepresentation, but we did have then 30%, more than 30%, who were a bit more timid cyclists who were interested but concerned about it. And we had a representation, 13%, that were not bicyclists. No way, no how. So that was interesting feedback, just so you know the sources of that. Ricardo, if you go to the next slide, please. And we'll put some of this information on the website. We did talk with the working group, as we said. They were a diverse group, and so what we heard roundly across all of the working group representatives was that parking removal would be a great hardship in this area, particularly in the business district. That was a concern. That again, we saw some gravitational pull toward that notion of the neighbor way, a traffic calmed, lower volume. Ellsworth, lots of curious folks, but wanted some more details about how that would work, and that this project has to be about more than bicycles. It has to be about improving conditions for bicyclists, or I'm sorry, for pedestrians, for neighborhood residents, for other users of the street, those with disabilities, and others. From the bicycle and pedestrian representatives, we heard that, you know, the diverter, while interesting, you know, maybe wasn't, you know, it doesn't carve out that space for people on bikes. So, you know, was it really an all ages, all abilities facility? A little bit of question there. Obviously still wanting to have protected bike lanes on Ellsworth, but not so interested in the alternate route neighborhood street options there. From the faith-based and institutional representatives, still, you know, a great concern for safety of bicyclists, particularly at Ellsworth and Negley, and how that was going to work to make them safe, and concerns for the area from Center to Negley as well. So great feedback, and we thank that working group for they have met many, many times, and so really appreciate the participation that they've given to us through this. Ricardo, if you go forward to the next slide, just a recap for those of you who were not here. If you could flip the slide, Ricardo.
Karina,
yeah.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt your flow. We had a request from the chat that sounds like your microphone might be rubbing on your jacket or your hair and making a little bit of static sound.
Sorry, it's cold in my house. I'm looking forward to spring. So.
This is spring. We're third winter.
Right. I'll take my coat off. Thank you.
Thanks.
So there are the alternatives. Again, you can go into the project webpage and go into detail on the last meeting for these. But essentially, there were four alternatives that were on Ellsworth itself. and 2 alternatives that utilized roughly parallel neighborhood streets. You go to the next alternative, slide, Ricardo. Thank you. So again, those, when we heard this kind of at the meeting, we started to hear this coalesce. We heard it even more in the follow-up surveys, that there was, the first 2 that really removed parking or really, significantly changed operations on Ellsworth were not, the trade-offs were just too great on those 2. The advisory bike lanes, not really doing anything for anyone. So that left us with these 3 that were the neighbor way on Ellsworth, sort of the slower, lower volume Ellsworth, and the 2 parallel street networks. So we're going to go into a little bit more discussion about what those alternatives are. Go ahead, Ricardo. And you can go one more time. So this is, again, just sort of a summary map showing you what these alternatives are in their network. So we'll call it alternative 5. This is essentially the Spar Walnut Elmer Street alternative, so a little bit closer to Ellsworth, but it does require, as you can see, jogging around to some of the other streets as you get closer to Oakland. And then alternative 6, which utilizes Howe and Kentucky. And then again, jogs around as you get closer to Oakland. So those are the 3 that sort of rose to the top. We did look at some hybrid alternatives that were raised, but as we worked through it with the advisory committee, the hybrid alternatives were really not providing any better alternative than what these are. You can flip to the next slide, but maybe we'll just briefly, we'll flip through that again. It's just showing sort of where, so all of these at this point are neighbor way alternatives. So no dedicated bike facilities, just sharing the street in a slower, more managed way, which, on our sort of scale of bicycle comfort, it falls in the middle, right? Protected bike lanes are better in general, people, because, they're protected. So it tends to be a safer and more comfortable space, particularly for those less confident, more vulnerable people on bikes. Off-street trails, even better still. We don't have room for those in this place, although we did, hear lots of recommendations about pursuing the busway and other kinds of things, which are not off the table, but a little bit out of our control because we don't own those assets, and because of they're down in a trench, it makes connectivity a little more difficult. But so the neighbor way is a lower stress, more comfortable facility. It does classify as an all ages, all ability bicycle facility for us. So go ahead, Ricardo.
Yeah, sounds good. Sorry to interrupt. We're still getting comments of feedback. I don't know if it has to do with
I don't know what to do. I'll hold the mic up a little bit and see if that helps. I don't know.
Yep.
We're still, someday we'll get out of this virtual world that we're in and meet for real. Okay. If you can go, we'll just walk through these concepts then. So this is the on Ellsworth connector. And so the strategy here would be to, right now we have about 6,000, 6,000 to 7,000 vehicles on Ellsworth. That is really too many for more vulnerable people on bikes to mix with motor vehicles. It's too intimidating. The vehicles get too impatient. There's just really too much friction, too much stress with those volumes. We do see higher rates of speed. We see a history of crashes. A lot of that is associated with the speeds and the volume of traffic. So this option would implement diverters to move traffic. So we do know that people use Ellsworth basically as a parallel route to Center and Baum and to Fifth Avenue. But they really have neither origin nor destination on Ellsworth. They're not there because they live there or pray there or shop there. They're there because it's a more convenient connection that they've discovered over time. So it's really those vehicles that we would be working to move off the corridor. We would keep the corridor for the volumes of traffic that have destinations there. If you go to the next slide. So we do recognize that Ellsworth really has 3 different segments that are quite different character. And so we would need to think about how the diverters would be placed to keep those sort of microclimates of Ellsworth together. So we have the section from Neville to Aiken, which is much more residential, faith-based, and institutional. We have the section from Aiken to Negley, which is predominantly residential with some education there. And then we have the business section from Negley to Shady. And so wanting to keep those sections together, implement different strategies in different places so that it can work appropriately, but keep those districts together. So I know a lot of you are asking, what is a diverter? You keep using this word. If you go to the next slide, Ricardo. So a diverter is really just a feature in the roadway that would force traffic to turn either right or left. They would not be able to proceed straight at that location. So it might be signage, it might be some physical deflectors like curb extensions, it might be a mountable gateway of sorts, like not dissimilar from a speed hump. But it would have the traffic turn, either up toward Center Baum or down toward Fifth Avenue to resume their journey on those larger, higher order streets instead of the lower order Ellsworth. The distinction being that transit, which is really important on this corridor, and we want to make transit an even more inviting and convenient means to travel on this corridor, transit would be permitted to continue straight. So we would manage that through signage. We would manage that through street design. Obviously there's a high degree of expected voluntary compliance with this, but that's really how the whole of our transportation system, frankly, works anyway. Stop signs are only as good as people stopping at them are. So that's what the diverter might look like. Obviously, this is more of a cartoon version of it. But it would be a geometric change in the street. If you go to the next slide, Ricardo. So these are just examples of diverters that are used in other places. So this one's in Portland, Oregon, where again, buses and bikes can proceed through local, but all other traffic needs to turn. And this is how we would get to that lower traffic. Again, the anticipation is that using the mapping tools that many people use now to route to and from the corridor, that will keep them on those higher order streets, and then they will be managed to take the appropriate perpendicular street to which of those segments of Ellsworth that they're destined for anyway. And so we'd get them swiftly to those segments. They can do their business, whatever it might be, on Ellsworth. And then in their departure, they would again return to those higher order streets. If you go to the next slide. This could be paired with additional traffic calming options to help. So those vehicles that still remain on Ellsworth, which we anticipate that we would still be looking at 3,000 or so vehicles on each one of those segments. Even with the diverters in place. And so we want to make sure that those vehicles, which is manageable, but not insignificant amounts of vehicle volume. So we would want to make sure that they travel at a safe and compliant rate. So we might do this through tools such as bump outs so that we can shorten the pedestrian crossing distances, make that much more comfortable, give greater confidence to the pedestrians that are crossing the street, maybe going from one business to another, much more inviting for them to do that. We might do that with speed humps to keep traffic slow. We might do it through other tools and techniques for traffic calming. Ricardo, you can go to the next one. We have looked at things like a pedestrian refuge island, high visibility crosswalks. These are, again, just other ways to keep the motorists alert, keep them moving at a slow rate of speed, and keeping them together with the pedestrians. Go to the next slide, please. So this alternative does not change the cross section. So the experience of Ellsworth on each one of those segments would still be the same. There would not be dramatic changes to the parking. There would not be dramatic changes to the curb alignment. Again, some painted bump outs perhaps, but nothing more than that. We can make it a more comfortable and low stress street by implementing some of those traffic options, and we would keep transit going along the length of the corridor so that you could still connect from end to end there. So, you know, some of the challenges is that the traffic, some portion of the traffic, you know, will shift someplace else, right? So we will need to observe that some traffic will shift to other modes. So we may see higher bus ridership. We may see, as we would like to see, greater use of walking or bicycling for those very short distance trips that are happening on here. But we will need to reabsorb the traffic somewhere in the network. It could be Center Baum, you know, or Fifth. It could be, frankly, even farther afield in the network as people figure out and recalibrate. There may be some parking loss due to curb extensions and some of the chokers and some of the traffic calming. These will generally be minimal. We expect most of them are frankly probably not legal parking spaces at this point anyway, so it'll just help with that compliance. And for the bicyclists, the people on bicycles, you know, we want this to be a low stress. That will really depend on how effective these are at lowering those vehicle volumes on the street, as to if that's really a comfortable and lower stress experience on that street. But it is, you know, sort of the one direct route that exists from East Liberty to those destinations in central Oakland, which is a tremendous sort of origin and destination travel pair that we have in the city. Ricardo, if you can go to the next alternative. So that's the Ellsworth one, and that is the only remaining alternative on Ellsworth that we're talking about. We are not really advancing the notion of protected bike lanes or one-way operations or anything like that on Ellsworth. To provide that accommodation there, we would do it without altering the street, other than kind of discouraging through traffic, cut through traffic for the length of the street. Alternative 5 is really looking at an alternative route in the neighborhood, as we mentioned before, using Spar and Walnut. If you can go ahead. So this sort of outlines, we'll leave this up, that this would be a two-way bicycle facility, on some of them, some protected bike lanes, on some of where we need to make those jogs, particularly on Neville Street and Aiken, in order to, because there are not other continuous through streets through Shadyside, we will need to have the bikes jog up and down. And we would need to really deal with the crossings to make those crossings safe. So there's a series of crossings that people on bikes and pedestrians would need to do to use the Spar and Walnut neighborway. You go to the next slide. We'd also need to add quite a few traffic calming treatments on the different streets. And so again, that would be to keep traffic speeds low on those parallel neighborhood routes. Go ahead. And so again, we would use different pedestrian refuge islands, high visibility crosswalks, things like that, that can help, again, increase visibility on that corridor, decrease travel speeds. Go to the next one. More using the bump outs, perhaps neighborhood traffic circles, as we've implemented in the Bloomfield neighborhood, again, just at those crossing locations where we're going to need to create that safe crossing for different users. If you can go to the next slide. But the biggest impact of this one would be that we would need to provide protected bicycle lanes on the higher order streets of Neville and Aiken in order to have that all ages, all abilities connection through these streets. And so we cannot provide, there's not room to just sort of, the volumes are too high to have vulnerable people on bikes share the lane on those streets. It's not something that you would put sort of the 14-year-old that you love most out in the middle of. And there's not space to just stripe it in without altering something on the street. And so what needs to be altered is there would be parking removal in those blocks in order to provide those connections and provide that protected connection between as the route jogs up and down through those neighborhood streets. So if you want to go ahead, Ricardo. So the neighborhood streets, sort of the east-west streets for would not require really any changes to the street. It would be the regular streets that are there. They're low volume, generally low speed, particularly if we put more traffic calming devices in there, that the people on bikes can comfortably share those streets with the motorists. However, as we mentioned, on those perpendicular streets, there would need to be protected facilities for them, and that does introduce certain challenges. Similarly, the crossings can be a little bit dodgy, and so that also introduces challenges. If we go to the other neighborway alternative, option 6, Ricardo, go ahead with the next slide. So this one really uses Kentucky and Howe. Again, has to have certain, those, you can see those north-south jogs that happen. This one includes a longer segment. Obviously, Kentucky and Howe are further south than Pembroke, sorry, not Pembroke, Elmer. And so we do end up with a longer segment that will need that protected treatment. So again, those sort of north-south-ish corridors are the ones where we do need to have parking removal in order to get that bike facility in. If you go to the next slide, lots of the same treatments. So we would have lower speed streets. We'd be looking at two-way bicycle travel on those neighborhood streets, and then protected lane markings on the high order streets. If you go ahead again, we would again be looking at traffic calming on those local residential streets, again, to keep traffic volumes low, speeds low on those streets. Go forward again. The major crossings and minor crossings, you know, again, are a challenging thing that we would need to increase visibility of those crossings. We would need to slow speeds, really ensure that we've got motor vehicle compliance so that we're not putting vulnerable street users in risky situations as they cross those streets. And there's a number of crossings that need to be addressed on those neighborways. Go ahead one more time. So we would again be looking at different strategies to improve those crossings. It might be bump outs, it might be mini circles. This is not designed. These are just tools that we have that we would be looking at to address those crossings. If we were to go with the neighborhood route, one more slide. And similar to the other option, to provide the all ages and ability facility. So again, if you're going to have a 70, 75-year-old, you know, out there biking, if you're going to have a 13, 14-year-old trying to get, you know, to school, we need to make sure that they are safe. That is the priority of this project. In order to do that, we do need to have a protected facility on those busier cross streets there. So go ahead, Ricardo. Basically the same concept as option 5, which is that on the sort of roughly east-west streets, the neighborways would really require no alteration besides traffic calming on those streets, but on the north-south streets, there would need to be alteration with the removal of parking to provide that two-way cycle track on one side of the street. So that's the way that we can provide that connection in the safest possible way. So if you want to go to that map, why don't we pause there so you can just see it on the network of streets, what the 3 options that have sort of progressed from our last meeting are. And I'll let Ricardo facilitate a discussion on
Yeah,
this.
thank you so much for that. So we're gonna let people use the raise hand option. That should be a button that's normally at the bottom of your screen. You can press that to raise your hand. I already see somebody using that, and we'll be calling your name, and we'll be switching between people that want to raise their hand and also comments or questions from the chat. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start. I'm gonna call Stefan. Stefan, please unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Stefan Gruber. I'm a resident of St. James Terrace. I bike with kids and without kids. I mean, I'm actually kind of really surprised that options 1 and 2 have been so easily discarded. And I kind of wanted to take a step back and just put the conversation a little bit in kind of a broader context. And I was wondering if you could speak to how these changes fit into the city's overall ambitions of meeting the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and Pittsburgh's resilience strategy. I feel that what I'm lacking is in a way kind of a broader kind of context for this discussion about reducing car dependency and reducing our carbon footprint. You know, if in a segregated city like Pittsburgh, one of the most privileged neighborhoods are not able to lead with a possible positive example, and you know, we're kind of just basically fighting over a kind of, or discarding actually the most desirable option for a few parking lots. It seems to me that we're really just kind of rearranging deck chairs on a Titanic. And so I don't know, I'm really surprised that suddenly, given all the feedback that was given in these discussions, the most promising options for kind of safe, soft mobility are actually just suddenly taken off.
Thanks, Stefan. I can appreciate that, and we know, you know, obviously we are pushing very hard to try and encourage more sustainable modes of travel. You know, even electrification of vehicles is not necessarily going to do it for us, because we'll need more power plants to electrify our whole, if we keep traveling the same way that we do. Having said that, you know, we do recognize that for the businesses on this corridor, that is a deep concern. And of course, what we don't want to do, and there's a sustainability impact if you can no longer get you know, goods and services within your own neighborhood because we haven't provided sort of the supportive infrastructure to those businesses, and if you need to travel outside of your neighborhood to get those. So I understand the disappointment. Was not dismissed easily. It's obviously something that there's been a lot of you know, desire around. We really sought ways to do that. We think that this option, if we can do it and if we can do it well, this actually will create an inviting option that can encourage the levels of bicycle travel that we want to see, that we can shift. And we've talked before that we know that 40% of the motor vehicle trips in the city of Pittsburgh are driven. I'm sorry, 40% of the motor vehicle trips in the city of Pittsburgh are less than 2 miles in distance. So they're very, very short distance. We need to move those 40% out of those motor vehicles into other modes if we're going to have a chance at a climate future. We think that these options, and I understand the disappointment, but we think that these options have, at this point in time, and with you know, the place that we're at, that we can attract that bicycle mode shift that we want to see, and we can still support the transition of our business community and our residential community. But I do appreciate, and I do understand.
Just to follow up, so you're actually arguing that the main reason for these decisions are actually businesses on outsource? Because just to give a little bit of context, so I mean, I direct the Masters of Urban Design at CMU, and there's been plenty of kind of projects since the 1970s about how pedestrians and making actually streets more walkable actually improve local businesses and don't reduce it. I think this is a completely misconception that just kind of reduced car dependency will actually hurt businesses on the long term. That's actually, I mean, there's examples all over the world that show the difference.
Yes, we understand, and so I want to make sure that we get other people to. We do, and I think that this is cities are an exercise in incremental change. They have been since sort of the dawn of civilization. You know, we change bit by bit. This we think is a first step that starts to build that confidence, and it's something that we can iterate on. Both alternatives that are here are things that we can continue as we define proof of concept, as we kind of build the confidence of both our residents and businesses, that we can continue to expand on it. But at this point in time, for where, you know, the understanding of our stakeholders are, you know, this seems, these three alternatives that are here seem to allow us to take that first step in iteration. And that's the important thing, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. This is the first step we want to take.
Thank you for that. I'm going to call somebody else to raise their hand, and then I'll switch to maybe questions from the chat. So I'm going to call Christine. Christine, please unmute yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Ricardo. Thanks, Karina, for the presentation. Just a quick question, if you're able to maybe put the link to the slides in the chat or something like that, it might allow for scrolling through and kind of reviewing what you had just presented as we go forward for others. I don't know if that's possible, but I would love that functionality to be able to look back at the alternatives you just presented and think about them as this discussion's ongoing. But I wanted to say just two things. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the diverter option. I guess I'm, you know, as a parent of a child in school on Ellsworth, I am concerned that, you know, I've mentioned it before, but that the diverter is showing in plan form and now in the montage, diverting traffic at the corner there where the school is, and there's a lot of, you know, coming and going of children and families. So I'm concerned from a safety point of view, and also air pollution exposure from the car exhaust. I'm just wondering why that if you could speak, I have a sense of why that location is desirable to divert, but given the location of the school and even the church, I guess, right there too, those are like two mini population centers. Could you speak a little to why that's preferable or might be being chosen as a concept location right now?
Sure. Paige, is that something you want to take, or do you want me to?
I guess all I'll say is that the diverter options are a few examples that started to stand out in our stakeholder group as potential opportunities of locations we could divert traffic comfortably to alternative routes. But we haven't done, you know, further analysis to determine exactly where we would put diverters, and we would be taking all of that into consideration.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
and then,
sorry, Christine, if we did the diverters, they would be accompanied by pedestrian crossing improvements, so that we would, you know, we're not going to trade safety for one mode off for safety of another mode. The goal of this is to increase safety for everyone of how they're traveling.
Okay, that sounds good. I just asked that maybe also the exposure to particulates, you know, if increased traffic is going past the school in a new volume, potentially in both directions. I don't know if it would change the number of cars, if it actually is just a perception that would be the case, but just something to consider. And then I just was wondering if you could speak to speed humps really quickly. I know there's a sort of like a pro and con discussion around speed humps, and it's just wondering how on the table they are as a traffic calming device, and if some of the cons that are floating out there about them are a consideration or a concern relative to snow removal and potentially also increased emissions from the start stop of approaching the hump and
Yeah, we can speak to that. So snow removal is really not an issue. So
Okay.
they're designed for the plows to go up and over them. And we're, I think, in our third season now from the first humps that we put in. And they do just fine. So they're not getting gouged by the plows. And we definitely put them to a test this past winter as far as snow removal goes. So yeah, so that's good news, bad news. Snow removal is not an issue. The difference with speed humps, so what is very does cause a lot of emissions is actually full stop and start. So when you have vehicles that are, slamming on their brakes because there's an object that suddenly comes into the roadway, because they're having to come to a full stop at a stop sign, or because another vehicle is trying to park in front of them or something like that. But when you come to a full stop and need to accelerate the whole weight of that vehicle again into motion, that is when you do see greater emissions happening. Speed humps are a traffic calming device, which is really indicating to motorists and others, if you travel at a steady 20 miles an hour or so pace on the street, you don't need to tap the brakes at all. Our speed humps are designed with a design speed of 15 to 20 miles an hour to travel over them. And so there really is no emissions change with that if the speed humps are designed right, and if the motorists actually travel on the corridor the way that they're designed to travel on them. We did, I know our early, I think one of our first speed humps that we put in on Beechwood Boulevard was a little steep. We ended up taking that one out. We've redesigned our spec now, so they're it's much more seamless to travel over them now. So we don't anticipate, again, the emissions benefits to the schools and to the institutions and to the residents there, will largely be by the reduction overall in the volumes of traffic that is going through that area. And we hope reductions in the overall motor vehicle miles traveled in our network as we make travel by alternative modes more inviting and attractive and possible. That will most certainly more than offset, those handful of vehicles who drive a little bit more erratically with these devices in place.
Yeah, hope, cross fingers, that should be the outcome.
Yeah, it takes a minute for people to adapt to them, but we have seen them, again, say for the one that we had to remove on Beechwood Boulevard, we actually are seeing traffic behave quite well in that corridor, for example.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And just to answer one of your questions, yes, we'll have the presentation, and we'll have a link to this recording, the recording of the meeting as well, just so, in case people were not able to take part of the meeting, they'll be able to see the recording and also look at the different slides. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and check with Alex and Anna and see if we have any important questions from the chat, or if not, we'll just move ahead with the raise hand. So
yeah, we had a lot of early questions. One of the questions Dorothy asked was for those who live in between the diverters, how would they get to their houses if they can't go down the street?
So the same way that others would, so you would travel on one of the parallel routes that exist in the network. So for example, if you worked downtown and, are returning back to your house, you would simply stay on, probably at that point, Center and Baum seems to be the preferred one. And then you would join from, so Ellsworth would still be a two-way street as it is now. So when you came on one of those perpendicular routes, you would be able to travel in either direction on Ellsworth to get to your destination.
All right. Thank you for that. Do we have, maybe I'll let Alex and Anna maybe read another
Yeah,
question.
we have a couple more, but I'll do, this one was from Glenn. He was asking, with speed bumps as traffic calming, can the bumps be sliced so that the cars will go over the bump, but the bikes would not? We just wanted to double check that.
Can they? They can. And what will happen is the motorists will find that wheel track and they will use it, and the speed humps will only be half as effective. So we learned this on Beechwood Boulevard, where we left the bike lane without the speed hump on it. We had to go back later because all of the motorists were then swinging into the bike lane to avoid the speed hump. So for the bikes, it's not that big of a deal. And again, it's a little bit of a social compact with the other users of the street. We do hear worry from other users about those more strong and fearless bicyclists going maybe a little bit too fast for comfort for other street users. So, that kind of helps keep everyone, in a very copacetic speed relationship. But yeah, if we did cut them, they can be cut. If we did, the motorists would drive through them and we wouldn't get the effect that we wanted. So our policy is we do not.
Sounds good. Thanks for that. I'm gonna go back to raise hands. I'm gonna call Adil and then I'll call Sean. Adil, please unmute yourself.
Thanks, Ricardo, and thanks everyone for all the process and for this, the way things are going. I wanted to ask two questions really. One, which I'm sure you guys will address, which is sort of what is the process going forward for the larger group in terms of how you sort of think through these decisions and get sort of better information. You can see that there's a great deal of interest on these things. I will say I'm quite pleased with, personally, I'm quite pleased with option 3. A lot of people are very unhappy with options 5 and 6. I know that you got broader data and input on that. And I know there's a lot of people like that are concerned about additional things. One thing I wanted to ask about, which is that the concept of diverters, the concept of all these things, I think it would be helpful to understand there are 4 major sort of cross streets across Ellsworth, right? If you think about Negley, Aiken, Morewood, I don't know if you count Neville. Neville's the end of it, right? Amberson actually, is also, one. And I think it'd be helpful to understand as you go forward, if you guys have answers right now, how does traffic on those roads get affected by how we're doing this? I mean, how does local people get to their houses or their sections? I assume it's sort of diverter blocking one way and the other way is available. But, in my head, if there was a diverter at Negley and one at Morewood, I think people would just go down Aiken and then, I just want to make sure we can understand how that works. And I'd like to hear from you guys about, or an assurance, I suppose, that you will take a lot of effort to address the crosswalks and crossing signals on those roads and the other ones that are on that walking path, because this is very important for bike safety. And candidly, without a calm to Ellsworth, I don't know that it matters. You have a bike lane; it still won't make my kids safe to ride their bike on that road, right? But without crosswalks and those safeties, I think it's very hard for the streets to be safe, especially if at some of these intersections now there'll be a lot of turning. So I just want to make sure that kids can walk to school and to the park as well. So I'd love to.
Yeah, so you gave us a softball on the second one. We will absolutely commit that we will improve the pedestrian crossings.
Including signals on those, because there's lots of young kids walking and it's hard to just the stripes alone really don't cut it.
Yeah, we're working to upgrade. So that's a capital budget thing to get those, you're talking about the pedestrian signal so that the don't walk on them. We're working, and it is our goal to get those on all of these signals. We prioritize those based on the volume of pedestrians that we have in there. So these are already quite high on our list. Hopefully everybody, cheer for, we hope, an infrastructure bill that will, help bring some more resources to it. So those we're working on systemically and trying to get more of those in. It is a budget item to do that. Absolutely, where we can neck down the crossings, where we can, shorten those crossing distance, where we can increase visibility, where we can increase lighting, for the winter months, where we can do those other kinds of things. We will absolutely do that. As we said before, this cannot just be a bike project, or, we've only served a portion of the population that needs improvement in this area, so it needs to be the bike one. On the traffic impact on the perpendicular streets, we have more research to do exactly on where those fall and how that's going to be. What the notion is that we would distribute it across those multiple cross streets so that there wouldn't be a sizable impact on any one of them. That's not what we want to do, is channel all of that to a single place where we then end up adding significantly more, but rather it would be distributed across the network. That's how the network works best, is when we can distribute that. But we'll we're still in this alternative selection phase. We hope that we can leave this meeting with something like a preferred alternative, so that we can dive deep into those questions and continue that refinement process with you all.
And what's the process going to be for that? Because I know there are lots of people who didn't make this meeting, as there always are. So like, is there a broader community survey that is going to go out about these options, or like there was after the April 21st meeting? Or
there will be, yeah, there'll be another survey that will go out. We'll continue to have that consultation. It is there, touching everyone is a difficult thing in the best of times, and a pandemic can be even more challenging. Actually, I think we have better participation on these virtual meetings than we do.
Huge plus on the virtual meeting. I could never make
in-person ones.
Can I just ask, I know there are lots of lists out there. I know there are lists of residents who've been interested in previous meetings. There's lists from the 2018. If it would be possible to make sure that the survey gets very broadly distributed, so that it is, this is a topic, like the last thing that would be good is, in my opinion, would be for the city to zero in on an option, and then all kinds of people discover it and then come late to the conversation. I think that will make things better. I think it would be better if there were thousands of people on the survey rather than a few hundred, even though it amplifies my voice, which I'm always a fan. Thank you.
Yes, we strive to do that. I would encourage all of you to tell 5 of your friends and ask them to tell 5 of theirs, so that we can continue to push it out broadly. We do want that broad participation. One last thing that I'll mention also is, it's hard to know the outcome of some of these things until you do it. And we are very comfortable piloting and, putting things in place, setting specific measures, reporting back to people the findings. And that's something that we may want to talk about too, is, shall we pilot it and see what happens? Not, try before you buy, not going with the hard, installations immediately, but see how it goes, so that we can all, speak from a point of knowledge about this. But that's something we might want to talk about also as far as next steps.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. I'm gonna call Sean. Sean, please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much for having this meeting. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. As a cyclist that frequently uses Ellsworth, the option 5 and 6, as someone who didn't use Ellsworth, like if they didn't attend these meetings, I think it would be extremely difficult and extremely unlikely that they would find these paths, and let alone that they would follow them, considering you pass Ellsworth twice. Like by going where the path starts, it goes all the way to Bayard and then back over Ellsworth. It just seems like a lot of people would just ignore it and continue on Ellsworth as is. And then the other thing, I do like option 3. It's not bike lanes, but I understand it's a compromise, that it's a constant battle. You can't, no one's going to get exactly what they want. But I do think that again, option 5 and 6, like you mentioned, it's small iterations to reinforce to business owners and everyone on the residents on the street that it's feasible to get rid of some parking. But I feel like option 5 and 6 aren't iterative designs. I feel like they're just kind of giving the business owners and the people that are arguing for parking what they want, instead of trying to implement something that has some small changes. That's just obviously my opinion, but I just think that 5 and 6 would not really actually benefit bikers much. It would just be we don't want to get rid of cars or get rid of parking and that kind of thing. So we're going to divert you to these other streets. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. And you raise an important thing that I do need to, but you raise a number of important things. One that I want to make sure that we point out, which is so that everyone knows that bicyclists are legal users of every street in the city, except for limited access highways. So even if we proceed with the neighborhood streets, it does not mean that bicyclists would be precluded from continuing to travel on Ellsworth. And as you say, we would expect that the more confident, the strong and confident people on bikes who, that's the preferred because it's direct mode of travel. They may continue to choose to stay on Ellsworth, and there would be nothing that would preclude that. That is a legal right that they have to travel there. The neighborhood streets, however, might be more inviting to the community cyclists, kids, going to get froyo or, whatever it is that they're, heading for there that might feel more comfortable. So that's why we show those two different options.
Yeah, I think my thought was just that with implementing the side ones and then people continuing to use Ellsworth, I feel like it might just frustrate drivers even more. But obviously that's something that you can't know ahead of time, but that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks so much for that feedback. I'm gonna call Susan Bailey and then I'll move back to the chat. So Susan, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this, all the amazing work you guys have done. And I am not a biker, but I do deeply appreciate all the people that are able to and that want to preserve our environment. That being said, I noticed that there is a diverter that you have implemented. I think it looked to me like it was on Amberson. And I was wondering if and this was brought up by somebody from the Unitarian Church, and I attend Church of the Ascension. I'm half an hour away, so by car, and I do use a low emissions car, low gas guzzler. I have a very small car, so I am concerned about the environment. The one option that was raised was, I'm wondering why the diversion wouldn't be for bikes either on Amberson or Morewood over to Bayard, since that is a connector to the continuous bike path. And then my second question is there any way to accommodate like people who are handicapped, people who are elderly, people who have children and need to transport them to our church, which is Church of the Ascension. And we have many attenders. Most of the parking is, other lots that we have paid for, and we're able to use those extensively, but there still is some need for street parking because of the number of people that come. Is there any way that those people could in some way get a pass that is attached to the car and they can park on the street?
I'm going to, no pun intended, put the parking pass question in a parking lot, but we can follow up on that later with the church and see. We do have some programs. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to really speak to that right now, but we can continue that dialogue later. On the bike alternate route, I know that we did examine that because that was a suggestion that came up at the last meeting. And so we did take a deliberate deeper dive into that to see if if there was a viable alternative there. And I'm going to phone a friend who actually did some of that analysis. So I think, Paige, that's probably you on what we looked at for taking the bikes onto that Bayard alternative route. And I know you gave me the answer, but I can't remember it. Sorry.
I'm sorry, if you could clarify a little bit. So you're talking about
the question,
reason for
why we looked at, in that western segment, having the bikes shift off Ellsworth, at Amberson. and shift north on that. But then we concluded that that actually wouldn't help us because, and I need you to finish that.
Right. So yeah, we looked at those as an options for the neighborway alternatives going further to Neville to avoid Ellsworth and the implications there. The important part with the stakeholder group was really that we got the connection all the way to Neville, because Neville has the Panther Hollow Trail connection, as well as the bike lanes on Neville Street, and it would be a very important connection for the cyclists that are trying to get to Oakland. So avoiding Ellsworth, Bayard, because there are already bike lanes on most of Bayard, and parts of Neville also already have bike lanes. It seemed like the extension of the existing bike network. So that's how I ended up on these neighborway alternatives.
Thanks.
Does that answer this question?
Yeah, you're making me remind me that there is not, there's no bike facilities between, if you tell me if I'm saying this wrong, between Bayard and Ellsworth now. And so if we did take it up to Bayard, that would have required removing all parking, just as we've talked about those other north-south connections, that would have required removing all parking on that block of Neville in order to make that safe connection down to the balance of the bike network. And that seemed like that was, again, trading one concern for another. And again, here in this section, there are not bike lanes. Bikes are, for better or worse, not provided their own facility. So there's no material change in the roadway or the parking that's in that segment. It's just lowering the volumes so that they can comfortably and safely share. And so that was the balance that was struck after we looked at that. But we did take a look at that option. So thanks for reminding us.
So what you're saying is people that are going on that stretch who have to drive are still able to go on that stretch.
Yes, yes. People who have to drive on Ellsworth will still be able to drive on Ellsworth. They will not be able, under option alternative 3, they will not be able to drive end to end on Ellsworth, meaning that they would not be able to drive continuously from Neville all the way through to Shady. But they would be able to drive, that whole block, perhaps, the next 2 blocks before then they would need to go up to one of those major streets.
So from Amberson to Neville, you would be able to drive that direction or the other direction?
Both. Yes,
okay.
The answer is
Thank
both.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate your help.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I'm going to pass the mic again to Alex to maybe see if there's more questions in the chat.
We have one question that says, can we implement all of the routes at once? She would love to know if that's desirable or in the budget at all. I feel like I know this answer, but.
Probably not would be the answer. But again, we're talking about things that can be, built on. If you like these as an answer, it's something that we can continue to iterate on and continue to implement over time. I think we'd like to start with something, and we can continue to expand on it as it works and as it makes the neighborhood better.
Mm-hmm. One question from Christine was asking, would this overlap with the recent press release indicating city investment in electric plug-in stations? Will this inform where those go in any way, to any degree?
No, not exactly, sort of in the same week, but we could put that in the same parking lot as what Sue was asking about, other sort of curbside management. That we might also want to look at now that we've turned our attention to this corridor. So, providing those electric vehicle charging is something that we want to do. We haven't figured out all of those spaces yet. If there's interest, and that we all know you all, we'd be happy to keep that conversation going on what's happening, then in those curb parking spaces that we're retaining in these plans.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. I see we have around 5 more raised hands, and we have around 10 more minutes left. So If you have more questions, instead of using the raise hand option, if you haven't used the option yet, I'll recommend adding your question in the chat. And I think we can power through these questions that we have in here. So I'm going to call Leah and then Andrew.
Hi, so my question is for options 5 and 6, we know that if those options are implemented, that there will still be a lot of bicyclists who decide to take Ellsworth. And I know a big reason for this project is that there have been crashes on Ellsworth. If this were implemented, option 5 or 6, and then there was a bike crash on Ellsworth, would the city say, well, you should have been on the neighbor way? I don't think that would be the case. Would we say, well, now we have to go through this whole process again? I just don't really understand how this all adds up.
Well, we would not say you should have been on the other things because, as I said before, bicyclists are legal users on every street, unless it's a specifically posted, which is really only for.
Right. I mean, I don't actually think that you would say that. I just feel like it's deferring the same conversation to have the same conversation all over again.
Well, we think that this does represent an improvement, and it does, again, as I keep saying, many of these things are iterative. It's hard to know sort of what the perfect solution is on this. But we do think that any of these alternatives that we're putting out in front of you does represent a safety enhancement. They may be of varying degrees, but it is a safety enhancement. It starts to get us on that first step. I think, Leah, a lot of this is just about confidence building. With many of the residents, change is hard, and it takes a while to fall into that, groove that allows us then to take the next step and the next step and go along with people on it. So I understand your question. I think it's a little rhetorical, but I do understand it. But what we're looking at is, to not turn this into an all or nothing discussion, but rather to get us somewhere, again, that we can start down that path and keep improving upon it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I have two Andrews in here. I'm going to call Andrew Bloomgarden and then Andrew Brown. So.
Okay, hey, this is Andrew Bloomgarden. So as a cyclist, I'm really excited and I'm interested in doing something rather than nothing. I remember the last time we went through this process where we ended up with a whole lot of nothing. So I'm excited about the option 3 here, where it seems like rather than getting into a fight, we can generally as a neighborhood agree that this is a reasonable option, some kind of compromise for all of us. That said, I think the way that this could go sideways is if we implement something like this and we water it down enough that we are not actually reducing speeds. We are not reducing traffic volumes enough. I lived in Portland 7-8 years ago. And I don't know if the diverter you showed was actually from Southeast Clinton, but they had to go and add diverters to a neighborway there, a greenway as they call it, because the volumes just got too high. So I'm asking, is that the metric that you'll be evaluating this on, like traffic speed and volumes to see if this is working?
Yes. Yes, for option 3, it would be traffic speed and volume, because we do know that there is as you've just said, there's a finite point at which the volumes get to be too much, that you're not getting the safety benefits, again, because motorists get impatient with one another and they start doing silly things that endanger everyone, or because same reason the traffic volumes are too great, that we lose that sort of low stress travel environment for everyone. So predominantly speeds and volumes is what we would be looking at. And we would, as we do with all of our projects, we would continue to measure over time and make adjustments. We're not, necessarily contemplating that this, we're going to get it perfectly right the first time. And again, that might be why we want to start with some piloting of it, but we would be measuring, we would be reporting, and we would be continuing to dialogue with the local stakeholders.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna call Andrew Brown now, and then Abe.
Thanks for the great presentation. I want to agree with everything that Stefan said at the beginning of the Q&A, but I also endorse this iterative change process. And I'm really supportive of alternative 3. Living downtown now, but still frequently biking through Shadyside, I think these transitions where you're kind of veering off the main path or the ideal path are really challenging to follow and are sometimes unsafe. And the diverter idea has kind of grown on me from when I saw it in previous presentations. I'm wondering though, what engagement you've done with the Port Authority on this diverter idea though, and if there are other examples in other cities you might be able to share in the future. Because biking in this corridor, some of my more anxiety-ridden experiences have been with buses.
Mine too, Andrew, not on this corridor, but elsewhere in the city. So we are engaging with Port Authority on a continuous basis because we're still working on that peaceful coexistence for the bus drivers and frankly with pedestrians too. So we're working on that. Specifically with regard to, and so is Catherine Kellerman, the CEO of Port Authority. They're very committed to trying to improve their safety record. So we're grateful for that partnership. Kim, I'm not sure who wants to take. There have been discussions. We have discussed in detail the concept of the diverters and the continuation of transit service on this corridor. That's a high priority for us. So I don't know if it's Kim or Paige who wants to talk about that. Discussions with Port Authority?
I'm happy to. The Port Authority discussed with all of our stakeholder meetings, various members of the Port Authority, and specifically related to option 3, we've discussed with them not only diverters, that different ways we can make diverters transit friendly. As we move through design, we would be able to further figure that out. It does sound like there are a few options that could work for them. So we've really appreciated having them, them at the table conversations, but we are working very closely with them to figure out a way to make transit friendly diverter, should that be the direction that we head.
Yes, and sorry about that. I unmuted myself on my computer, but not on my headphones. And by the time I figured that out, Paige had already stepped in. Thank you, Paige. And we did have representatives from the Port Authority that attended some of the working groups. So they were a part of that conversation and a part of the development of this potential, proposal, because some of the other ideas that were presented at the first meetings were ones that would have had a negative impact on transit. And that's why you're not seeing those tonight, is because in conversations with this community and in conversations with the Port Authority, we identified better solutions that wouldn't have that impact.
Thanks.
Thank you for that comment. I'm going to call Abe now.
Thanks, Ricardo. And thank you, DOMI, for putting this together. I also echo what Stefan was saying in the beginning. I think options 1 and 2 were dismissed a little bit too quickly. But of the remaining options, I think that 3 provides the best alternative. I've been biking on this corridor for about 7 years now, and I find Ellsworth to be the most direct route to get to Oakland from the East End. And the question that I have is how, I think similarly for students who go to Pitt and CMU, this is also the most direct route. And I'm wondering how you'll account for all of the university students who didn't know about this meeting, but will continue to use Ellsworth as the most direct route via bike and bus.
So again, it is the most direct route. It is the most convenient. It's no surprise that they'd use it. They are still, we still want them to be safe when they do, and they're still allowed to do it. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly how to answer it.
I guess, yeah, maybe another way to rephrase my question is like, in terms of key stakeholders, what carries more weight, the student who wasn't able to make this meeting but bikes on this corridor 7 days a week, or someone who comes into town once a week to attend a community or a church service?
Well, I mean, we try not to pick favorites. As a parent, I can tell you that's not a good thing to do. So, you know, again, what we want is a street that works for everyone. The person who, you know, comes to, you know, the faith service or drops their dog at the vet, you know, once a quarter, or, you know, whatever it is, they're still important members of our community. Of course, the students, you know, who are here, you know, 9 months or year round or for 4 years or forever, are also important in the long-term residents. They're all, we're not going to pick favorites on it. We want to provide a safe corridor. And by corridor, I mean the number of redundant streets as well, that work whether you are visiting Pittsburgh for, you know, the one trip in your lifetime that you'll be here, or if you're biking on this corridor 7 times a day. We don't want to make those trade-offs. So we're trying to, again, find something that at least as that first step can work for everyone, and to give us the confidence to take then the second and the third step if we need to.
Great, thank you. And you have a hard job, so I don't envy you.
Being a parent or this job? Sorry, just kidding.
Domi has a tough job.
Thank you for that. I know we're a little past, you know, over time. I'm just gonna pass the mic to Alex real quick for one last question from the chat, and I think maybe we can wrap up.
Yeah, we just have one question that was asked recently that I feel like would be good to answer. How are emergency vehicles affected by diverters, or how are they not affected by diverters?
They're not, for the most part. So emergency vehicles, actually what we found is they're helped. If we reduce vehicle volumes on the street, obviously that will aid in, you know, their movement down the corridor if they have to, just as the transit vehicles will be able to go through here, the emergency vehicles would follow in the same path. So actually it could be a benefit to emergency response down the corridor, simply because you know, they would have a clearer path to get to those emergencies. But we also hope that by creating a safer corridor, we're going to have fewer reason to have those emergency calls.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, well, if you feel like your question wasn't answered, just please put it in the chat and we'll make sure to respond, because I'll be sending you an email with not only the recording of the presentation, the recording of this meeting, but also the presentation as well. But yeah, so I don't know if Karina, we want to go to the next slides.
Yeah, we can keep we can keep going, Ricardo. That answers some of those next steps. There you go. Next steps, next slide. So we do have these 3 alternatives that are still out there. I do very happy for the people who are taking the all of the above perspective, but if you could prioritize your all of the above, that would be great. And so that will, there'll be a survey, Ricardo, is that right? That will be out and about?
Yes, maybe I can have Alex share that if you have it, but if not, I'll also be sending you that via email. So
great. So we want to, we've got, you know, a month or more, well, I guess it's give or take a month to really marinate on these, really think about what it means, you know, ask more questions, poke us, we'll give you answers to these, think about it. But we do hope then that we will be able to come out of this with a preferred alternative. I think the council person and myself, we've held office hours before. If we need to do that again, we'll make ourselves available for it. We want to dialogue with you on this, but we do want to move forward to get to that at least incrementally better place than we are right now. So contemplate these. Go to the next slide, Ricardo. There will, yes, office hours and those kinds of things. So there's a website, there's the survey link is there at the bottom.
Yeah.
And so this whole presentation will be up on the website. Go ahead, Ricardo, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I just wanted to add that Alex was able to share the survey, but yeah, again, just reminding everybody that, you know, like I'll share with you the meeting, I'll share with you the presentation and the recording as well.
Great. And as was mentioned, sorry, I can't remember everyone's name, but we do want broad participation. We know, you know, even though the, you know, 120 people that registered for this are a great touch point, we'd be happy to have 1,000 discrete participants in that survey. So please share it with people who are true stakeholders of this corridor in one way or another. You know, we're happy to educate them on it if there's questions, because there's a lot of, you know, strange words like diverters, neighborways, things like that. But looking forward to that input from everyone. So thank you, you all. I know this is a difficult conversation in a corridor that just has so many diverse stakeholders on it. So important. You know, for the people in our city for traveling, the climate implications, the business implications, the residential quality of life implications, we know. So really grateful for just the good neighborliness you have demonstrated here. Mr. Rogers would be so proud of this meeting. Thank you. Okay, Ricardo.
Yeah, no, thanks again to, you know, you guys, for the team for the presentation, and for everybody for being really respectful when asking questions or you know, using the mic. I just want to say that, you know, we have been trying to improve our outreach. We have been trying to put more posters out, postcards, but if you for some reason feel that we haven't reached a certain community or organization, just send us an email with that, and we'll be more than happy to you know, share information with them, like the survey. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I hope you guys have a great night, and I'll be sending you another reminder, another email reminder with the survey and more information as well. But yeah, I hope everybody has a great night.